This is part of an ongoing series of lectures on Javier Zubiri's book, Man and God. We're still in part 1, chapter 1, but now we're in section 2 on human reality. Section 1 talked about the nature of reality as such, and now, as in our last lecture, we've begun the discussion of what human reality is. So this is the second part of that discussion. So we had been talking about what Zubiri calls the suchness of human beings. The human being is an animal of reality. That is our in. That is the kind of thing that we are. That's us with respect to what we are internally, so to speak. The biological unity of sensing constitutes our animality. We are not the only animals, but the human mode of sensing, as we learned last time, involves the formality of reality. In other words, we get the impression of otherness as other in its own right. That's what he means by saying we're the animals of reality. And if I can pause for a minute to say that if that's the kind of thing that we are, if that's the kind of substantivity that each of us is, an animal of reality, then to the extent that we have lost touch or become separated from reality, to that extent we have become less than we might be. We've become dehumanized to a certain extent. If human beings are the animals of reality, then it's so vitally important to us to understand the nature of reality and to be immersed in it. As Ayakriya said in his lecture, What is the Point of Philosophy? Now, we want to move from the suchness, the what kind of thing is the human being, to what Zubiri calls the transcendental moment of human reality, our form and mode of reality, our X, as he puts it, the fact that we project, so to speak, into reality, that are implanted into reality. The suchness talked about what we are. Transcendental talks about that we are, the fact that we are, and each of us is as an individual. So not only are we a kind of reality in some kind of silo somewhere, or catalog of kinds of things that there could be, but we are implanted in reality as the kind of reality that we are. Just as all of our notes are interdetermined in our in, so we are interdetermined by and with all the rest of reality in our X. And the purpose of this section is to talk a little bit about how that happens. So with regard to the form and mode of reality, Zubiri gives us a comparison. He talks about a stone. He says, take a stone. It falls because of the force of gravity. The substantivity that is that particular stone falls, if it does, because of the force of gravity. If a human being falls, the human being falls because of the force of gravity, as the substantivity that it is. But Zubiri wants to add, different from the stone, with the human, the why question still remains. Did she jump, or did she fall by accident? Was she pushed? You might say, well, wait a minute, isn't there a why question if a stone falls? Was it thrown or was it kicked or something like that? But with a human, it could be very possible that the human falls of its own volition, of its own choice, or by the choices of other humans. Even the stone may very well have fallen because of the volition or choices of other humans. So there's a different form of reality that we are in each mode of reality that we find ourselves in. When a stone falls, all of it falls based on its notes. In other words, it falls per se. When a human falls, all of it falls based on its notes. It falls per se, but also with respect to its notes. A se, that's a Latin phrase that is a translation of kind of with respect to. So what does that mean? When you act, all of your notes are in act at the same time, just like when a stone is in act, all of its notes are in act at the same time. But with us, as opposed to the stone, when we act with respect to our notes, that's called self-possession. It's a key idea. And now we are coming out of what I called the deep stuff earlier on in Zubiri's metaphysical views. We are coming back to the surface of who we are as human beings. And the thing that he wants to point out here is this idea of self-possession. Self-possession is not a separate act. It's not some extra thing that you do. And it's not a note or even a system or subsystem or quasi-system of notes. It's the form of human reality, whether carrying out its acts or not. So when Zubiri talks about the form of something or the formality of something, he means almost in a Platonic sense, what is the form? What kind of thing are we talking about here? And the kind of thing, the what kind of thing a human being is a being of self-possession. It's not an act. It's not a characteristic that you might or might not have. It's not a note, as Zubiri would say. It's the form of thing that each one of us is. Self-possession is the formal explanation of personhood. Personhood is another formal aspect of what it means to be the kind of being we are, self-possessed. He makes this distinction now between two words, as he often does, that sound pretty similar, but he wants to make an important distinction between them. Here, personhood, sometimes translated as personality, versus personality. And it's important to understand what those two words mean in Zubiri's thought. Self-possession is the root and character of personhood, as we just learned. Personality is the concrete changes that personhood undergoes in each being that is characterized by personhood. So think of it this way. Each one of us, as a human reality, is characterized, so to speak, as possessing or exhibiting personhood equally. What does that mean? Each one of us is a being of self-possession. But as beings of self-possession, what each one of us does being in self-possession will be quite different. So that's going to mean that each one of us has a different personality in Zubiri's sense, a different manifestation of personhood. Personhood is the form of reality. Personality is the figure in accordance with which the form of reality, which is the same in each one of us, molds itself in its acts insofar as it does mold itself in them. In other words, it's not just some disposition, but it's a concrete determination of what personhood means in each one of us. So each one of us is a personality. Those personalities are different. Each one of us is a personality because, as we all share in common, we are beings of personhood. We are beings of self-possession. So you can see some parallels, just to take a pause here on the way Zubiri kind of looks at things. In the middle column, those terms that are there are grounded upon what's on the left side of the screen, and they ground or make possible, or the conditions of possibility of what's on the right side of the screen. So on the top row for Zubiri, reality is the ultimate ground. And because things are real, they can have being. And because some things are in being, some, not all, can exhibit existence. And by existence, he would mean exactly what any existentialist philosopher would mean by existence, that ability to existere, to stand outside of the being that you are and take up a stance towards it. That's another way of looking at self-possession. We already heard those terms, actualness, going off the Spanish verb to be ser, and actuality, going off the other Spanish verb to be estar. So all real things possess actualness because they're real. They're grounded in reality. But only certain things at certain times come to actuality, as we said, come to light, show up. And he's got the same kind of thing going on here. Because we are a certain form and mode of reality, a form that's in self-possession, a form that is characterized by personhood, each one of us then can exhibit or manifest a particular concrete personality. Because we have personhood, we can have personality. And then what we'll get to eventually, and this is going to be the wind-up of Zubiri's book here, that he's going to tie reality to the absolutely absolute. And he's going to show that human beings are grounded upon this absolutely absolute. And he's going to say, but in a relative way. We are the relative absolutes. And I think I might have mentioned in an earlier lecture, if I ever write a book on Zubiri, that would be in the title, The Relative Absolute. If you could get that, you could get the whole idea of what Zubiri is saying here. Personhood is a metaphysical question for Zubiri. It's not about psychology. It's not about anthropology. It's akin to what Aristotle was talking about in that functional analysis of the soul, the structure of the soul. Personhood is structural. It's part of what it means to be a human being as such. This is the reason, he writes, for the profound nature of personality. One is a person, in the sense of personhood, by the mere fact of being a human reality. That is, by having intelligence, sentient intelligence. To be sure, he writes, the human embryo acquires intelligence and thus personhood at a moment almost impossible to define. But once that moment arrives, the embryo has personhood. Now, those of you who want to think about the moral issues involved with life and with the issue of abortion may want to think a little bit about what Zubiri is trying to say here, that the kind of reality that the embryo exhibits at some point takes on personhood. Okay? And that may be something that you want to ponder on. Once personhood has arrived, though, so does personality. Right? Personhood is a formal aspect. It's just the form of something, but it doesn't get right to the mode of that form in reality itself. That's what personality is. That form of reality, personhood, is always molding itself, maybe even in the embryonic stage. It's always molding itself, even from the very beginning. It is always actualizing personality. There's never a case when there's personhood, but no personality in Zubiri's sense. There's never a case. When Zubiri talks about personhood, he's talking about a form, and it's the same in all of us. When Zubiri talks about personality, he's talking about every one of us, each in his or her own unique individuality. And he says, that is why a human being is always the same, but never the same. By reason of its personhood, it is always itself, a being of self-possession. By reason of its personality, it is never the same. So not only is my personality different from your personality, your concrete manifestation of what it means to be a person different from my concrete, real manifestation of what it is to be a person. Those are different. But even when it comes to me, myself, my personality, how I am concretely manifesting my personhood is always in flux. It's always undergoing change. It's always being actualized again and again and again, with no days off, with no moments off. It's an ongoing dynamic process. You know, Zubiri wrote a book called On Essence, and I told you a little bit about finding that book in a bookstore in San Francisco one time. And it's a very dense book, but it talks about his kind of metaphysical views. But that book was pretty dense, and his friend said, you got to write something that's a little bit more accessible than that, because not only was it a dense book, but it made it look like reality is static. And Zubiri says, no, that's exactly what I don't mean. So he wrote another book, a much more accessible book called The Dynamic Structure of Reality. And this is that dynamism exhibited in each one of us now, actualizing our personality, actualizing the person that each one of us is. That's an ongoing, no days off, no vacations, no breaks task of what it means to be a human reality. The human being is a person, a personal animal. Any living being is implanted in reality as forming a part of reality according to its own mode. Now, maybe that's a tongue twister kind of a sentence, but basically what he's saying is, look, any being, a human being, a cat or a dog or a squirrel or a bird, is a reality, a certain form of reality, a certain mode of reality, and insofar as it is with everything else, all of those different forms and modes of reality being implanted in reality, which for Zubiri is always one, make up reality. Reality consists in all of these various forms and modes of reality interlaced with each other. So a human being is implanted in reality as forming a part of reality, that's everything else, But what part? What part does human being play in its implantation of reality? What part? The part that confronts all of reality. As real as possible or even divine. We are part of reality. We are real. We're part of reality. But we're a special part of reality. We're a certain part of reality. A certain way that reality itself gets characterized. There's an element in reality that can confront itself. That is aware of itself. That can step back from the rest of reality. That's that word exist. To step apart or step away from or step back from. Step out from. That stands out. We are that form of reality that stands out even from reality as such, as recognizing reality, as having its notes in its own right. That's what's special about us. Human being is set off from the rest of reality. It is absolute. That's what that word absolute means, to set off from where things stand. This is our unique mode of independence. So there's something of an autonomy, as we mentioned, an independence of human reality. Everything else that's real is implanted in reality, and it's, if I could put it this way, stuck there. Like Jean-Paul Sartre would say, like glued there. He liked that we thought existence, being was gluey. Things were just stuck in it with no way out. But human beings have a certain capacity to be absolute, to pull away from that the rest of the solvent there, the rest of everything else. But the human being is a relative absolute, not an absolutely absolute, but a relative absolute. We're absolute because our form and mode of reality has the capacity, let's say, to confront all of the rest of reality and take a stance towards it. But it's relative because this mode of absolute implantation, Zubiri says, has an acquired character. We didn't, if we were absolutely absolute, we could have picked our form and mode of reality. We didn't pick it. We just got it. We acquired it as the kind of reality that we are. Now, again, Zubiri, in many ways, even though he's a very metaphysical philosopher, as we've seen, very systematic, in many ways he shares some of the sensibility of the existentialists, who I keep mentioning. The Jean-Paul Sartre, the great French existentialist, died in 1980. He said, he had this great line, man, and he meant all of us, man is condemned to be free. Now, if you think about it, that's an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp. It's two things like awfully nice. They shouldn't go together. Condemned to be free. If the judge condemns you, the one thing you're not is free, right? You're not free. But what Sartre was trying to say there is, you are not free to be not free. I can put it that way. That the freedom that you are, not just have, that you are, you don't have any choice about that. You are free, the end. At least metaphysically, at least in your essence. You are free. And Sartre would say, even on the rack, which was a medieval torture device, even in jail, Sartre would say, the human being is free. Free how? Free in the sense to make of whatever its situation or its condition happens to be what one will. Good example is this COVID-19 pandemic. All of us are in the same situation, so to speak. All of us have to deal with COVID-19. It's just out there. It's the way of things at the moment. We all have to deal with it. But some people deal with it really well, and they found a way to, this gives me time to play the ukulele, or bake bread or whatever, or gives me a chance to save money on commuting and corporate clothing and all that kind of stuff. Other people really had a hard time with this, really had a struggle. But Sartre would say, that's a matter, ultimately, when you get right down to it, of free choice, how you're going to respond. You're not free to just say, hey, COVID, go away. That's not going to work. You have certain conditions. A certain facticity is the word the existentialists use. Bells that can't be unrung. Your DNA is what it is. Your parents are who they are. The economic climate is what it is. mean, you can't just choose away all that stuff. That's part of your makeup. But what does that makeup mean? That's going to be up to you. That is going to be up to you. You don't have a choice about that. Sartre would say you are free, even on the rack, even in jail. You're free. You're condemned to be free. There's no days off from that. And Zubiri's trying to say the same thing here. We have this absolute character. We have this ability, inescapable capacity to confront all the rest of reality, including our own reality, what it's going to be about. But we don't have a choice about that. Whatever that characteristic that makes us absolute is still a relative absolute. We didn't get that choice. If we had the absolute choice to be absolute, if we had the absolute choice to determine everything about us, even to have picked that in the first place, well, we'd be God. And God is the absolute absolute. But we human beings are the relative absolute. And where this is going to go is Zubiri is going to say, well, those aren't just two parallel lines, the absolute absolute and the relative absolute. The absolute is the absolute. We're a part of that. The absolute absolute is reality. We're real. We're a part of that. But a relative absolute, well, that's to come. He says on page 46 of his book, in its life and in the most modest of its actions, the human being not only realizes a series of personal acts according to the properties it has and the situations in which it finds himself, but in each one of them, the human person defines in a precise and concrete way the mode according to which its reality is relatively absolute. Therein lies the seriousness of each act. The seriousness of each act. Zubiri thinks because we are relative absolutes, we are always actualizing our personhood. In other words, constituting our personality. We're constituting what it means to be relatively absolute. In confrontation, that doesn't mean a fight, but just being able to stand over against reality, even our own reality, and take up a position towards it. That's serious. We have our being to be. The being of the coffee cup just is. It is what it is. It is in itself. Sartre would say, Jean-Paul Sartre again, he would say, our being is not an in itself. It just is what it is. Our being is a for itself. Our being is the kind of being has to decide what its being is all about, has to decide what human reality is going to be about. And that's where the seriousness of each act comes in. He describes this as, in his terms, the restlessness of life. The restlessness of life. Human reality is restless. Literally, it means there's no rest from actualizing your personality. Like I said, no days off, no vacations, no holidays from actualizing your personality. In every choice and action, no matter how trivial or small, you are determining with all the seriousness that there is what it is you will be about. So your life is literally restless. The coffee cup is at rest. It is what it is, not a human reality. And that is what he meant by the problematism of the absolute. To be able to stand back or step back from reality constitutes a problem in the sense of something you've got to deal with, something you have to handle, something you have to manage or make something of, something you have to actualize. Now go back again to the very beginning, the author's introduction to the book, where he says that God has to be recognized as a problem. And I said a minute ago that God is the absolute absolute, the absolutely absolute. And I said that we're a part of that. Now start doing the math. Start putting that all together, and you can see where Zubiri is going to go. And we'll go there. The being or the actuality, not the reality, the being, the showing up, how we turn out, how we actualize our personality of this relative absolute of the world is the I. Right? Now we're going to talk about I. Descartes talked about I, right? He was the one who said, I think, therefore I am. And philosophy starts with the I, and the I is the one thing that I cannot doubt, at least in terms where the I is conceived as a thinking thing, and all of my understanding is based on that the I is the fundament. Well, here's Zubiri talking about that. When you say I, and we all do, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? We're not talking about our metaphysics. We're not talking about formal structures. Because when I say I, it means something different than when you say I. When I say human and you say human, we're probably talking about the same thing. When I say I and when you say I, we're talking about two different things. Right? So I is the being or the actuality, the showing up, the personality of this particular relative absolute versus that one. Zubiri says, think of this I as a predicate rather than a subject. Right? You learned when you were first learning your grammar and everything that I is the subject of a sentence. Like, I run. Run is the verb, I is the subject. Or I throw a ball. I is the subject, throw is the verb, and ball is the object. So I am the subject, the ball is the object. But Zubiri says, no, you should start thinking about I as a predicate. You shouldn't say, I am this reality. You should say, this reality am I. All of this, that's I. There's not some I that stands behind it and makes all of this happen. Rather, all of this happening just is I. That's all it is. He's trying to convey that our I is configured. It's made. It's constructed. It's made in the reality of all of our actions and choices. I have to make myself. We oftentimes talk about, oh, you know what I'd really most like to do? I'd like to find myself. As if you were up the road somewhere, tapping your toe, looking at your watch, going, when am I going to show up? No, I'm not pre-made. I am absolute because I have to make myself. I'm relatively absolute. Because I'm not pre-made, I am absolute. I'm not just an is what it is. Because I got no choice about this, I'm relatively absolute. It wasn't my choice to be the kind of being that has to make choices. That part wasn't a choice. That's just the kind of thing I am, and that's what he means by a relatively absolute entity, like myself. Now, he likes to give these kind of homey examples for things about how I gets constituted or made. So he has a little simple thing about eating an apple, simple as it sounds. He says, first I apprehend that I'm a reality and that my hunger is a reality, and at the same time that I apprehend that the apple is a reality, and I feel like I'm hungry. I see myself as hungry, and I would enjoy eating the apple, right? And then I sort of grasp that it's not just hunger like a generality, but it's my hunger, and I'm eating my apple. This is mine now. I'm eating this. I've conveyed some being or actuality onto both of those things. Hunger is actual, but now I've actualized it as something I want to deal with. And the apple had actualness, but now it's actualized into an actuality as something that might satisfy my hunger. If I made that apple my apple, not just an apple, some kind of generality out there, but mine. And finally, he says, I understand these actions and choices are making me the I that I am, the person I will have become. Not a big deal, not in like, I will have become a great actor or author or captain of industry or something. No, I just mean I'm an apple eater. It's no big deal. Well, okay, but your life is made up of millions of these no big deals, and if you take them together, they're all kind of serious. If you don't like apple, might say hamburger. Now you're somebody who eats meat, and you're somebody who accepts everything that has to go into the possibility of your eating meat, factory farming and whatever that does to our water supply and our atmosphere and all that stuff. It is serious. You become an apple eater, you become a meat eater, you become a consumer, you become a voter or a non-voter. All of those choices and actions that you take up start to, well, in fact, they always are, constituting the I that you are. All of that is the I that you are. I is a predicate, something that's constructed or made. Now, everything I've been talking about there is still part of the suchness, the in part of my being, my I. That's important. What does it just mean to be an I? Mean to be a personality, manifesting personhood? What does it mean to be a being of reality? All that's the kind of being that I am, and the examples are just showing how that works. But each one of us, each I, the one that I am, the one that you are, they're different from each other, has a form and mode, a transcendentality, an X, an out. That's that personality again. That's how it shows up. So you can see that personality for Zubiri doesn't mean just like cheerful or quiet, but it's the sum total of how I actually am in the world, my being in the world, as the philosopher Martin Heidegger would say it, my being in the world. That's all one thing, being in the world. There's not my being and then the world, right? My being is made up of the worldly actualizations that I'm involved with. That's what makes me the I that I am. I'm not an I first, and then I plunge into the world like it's a swimming pool and I get all wet by the stuff that's all there. Nope. All that's there is interacting upon me to construct and constitute the I that I am. It doesn't negate my self-possession. It makes my self-possession possible. If you were totally isolated from the world, self-possession would make no sense. And so personhood would make no sense. And nothing you understand about yourself would make any sense because you'd be separated from it all. Right? Self-possession is the flip side of what Heidegger would call being in the world, or what Zubiri would call our personality, our transcendentality, our engagement or implantation in reality. So personality is the form of absolute being. And what does that mean? Well, meaning it is a stepping back from strict determinism and necessity. It's a kind of freedom. St. Augustine was talking about that in his Confessions when he talked about stealing pears when he was a 16-year-old kid. He said, why did I steal pears? I didn't need them. I wasn't hungry. They really weren't the greatest pears. We didn't sell them. I just kind of trashed them. Why did I steal pears that didn't belong to me? Because I just wanted to feel free. I know I wasn't really free, because if I were really free, like super absolutely free, then I could just summon up my own pears. I wouldn't really need any of that stuff. But there are limits. There are barriers. My neighbor put up a fence. I don't like a fence. There's something about me that wants to be free, that wants to break all those barriers. That's my self-transcendence at work. That's what makes me in the image of God in a way, right? Well, okay, that's it. That's what makes me in the image of God, as Augustine puts it. I'm not God, but I'm kind of sort of like God because I don't like limits. God has no limits. We have limits, but they're fluid. And anytime limits are fluid, how much of a limit are they really? You say the speed limit is 55 miles an hour and you're going 65. What kind of a limit is the speed limit? Hard to say, right? And when you say, well, what is a human being? What are the limits? Well, every year, every month, we seem to be pushing those limits. So what does it really mean? It's hard to say. Personality, this ongoing dynamism of making our I, is a form of absolute being. It's a form of being that's not locked down in a strict determinism or a kind of necessity. Now, he gives another example to try to say what he's talking about here. He talks about the example of repentance. He says, suppose I commit a crime and I repent. It doesn't mean the crime never happened. Right? It doesn't mean I didn't do the crime. I mean, when I repent, it's like, oh, well, that just means you didn't do it then. Well, that's crazy. Of course, that's not right. I don't erase the crime. But as he puts it, I incorporate a past reality into a different figure of being. And that's what I was talking about when I alluded to Sartre a little while ago. Okay, I did something. I can't unring the bell of having committed this crime. But what is it going to mean for my life? Is it going to mean, am I going to interpret that to mean that my life is over and I can't do anything else? That now I am a criminal because I've committed a crime? That's what I am. I'm a criminal, like my coffee cup's a coffee cup. Or do I say, wait a minute, I have, within a situation, within a context, I have the possibilities to make something out of that crime. Can I turn my life around? Can I use it for some good? Can I make life better for other people if I can't make it better for myself? That reality is the reality it's always been. I committed the crime, but I turn it into a different figure of being. I let it appear in the world differently than it was. Right? That's what personality is all about. That constant configuring and reconfiguring and being configured and being reconfigured all the time without end till we die. Now, he takes a little what looks like a side path here, and he wants to talk to us a little bit about species. And we say, we're Homo sapiens. That's our, genus and species. What's a species? And he says, traditionally, species has been the correlate of a definition. To belong to a species is to meet the criteria of a certain kind of definition, something that you look up in the dictionary. So Aristotle would say something like, he didn't know species like Darwin, would understand the term, let's say, but he would say, well, what it means to be a human being is to be a rational animal. It's a genus, it's an animal, and what's the specific difference? Well, it's rational, right? That it's like definitional, and that would unify everything. Everything that's a rational animal would be lumped into this category called human being. And it unifies. But Zubiri likes to think that species doesn't unify, but pluralizes. A species exists by speciating, according to a phyletic schema. And a phyletic schema is kind of like an outline or a blueprint. But when you have a blueprint of the house, the house can look a lot of different ways based on the same blueprint, right? You can add and subtract features and paint different things and, make adjustments, but it's still based on the same kind of scheme, the same kind of blueprints. But that's what blueprints do. They're there to make lots and lots more, but not of the exact same thing, but a plurality of those things. He thinks that's what species is. He says, thus the human reality is constitutively genetic. It's producing. It's spreading seeds all over the place that grow in lots of different ways. He says this is the principle of the co-determination of persons. Each person is sort of an outline or a force, a generator of replication according to that schema. The replication results in another personal animal. So my schema is that of another personal animal. Think about that for a second. The blueprint of mine is not mine. The blueprint of mine is the blueprint of others. The thing, it's interesting. The thing that makes me me is not specifically me. Makes me the kind of thing I am is not specifically me. My schema is that of another personal animal. He says, my substantivity, that's a real thing, is constitutively and vitally poured out from itself to other persons. The others are not something added to me, but something towards which I am constitutively poured from myself. I am in my own right, schematically the other person's. He's trying to convey this idea that's anti-modern. The modern idea is that each one of us, following on Descartes' I think, the only thing I'm sure of is I, that each one of us is an isolated individual fundamentally. And Zubiri is denying this, like all postmodern thinkers do. Denying this, not just because it is metaphysically indefensible. There's not really a great philosophical argument that makes you want to accept that view, although it was widely accepted, but it has pernicious ethical and political implications as well. Not that Zubiri's talking about them here, but our other thinkers will certainly pick up on that. We inter-are. The schema is at one and the same time a schema of organic function in and the schema of that somatic function, the out, where we show up in the world. Whence it follows that each person has two sides. On one side is a reality which is his or her own, determined as absolute with respect to every other reality as such. But on the other side, my person is a reality whose absolute character is in some way co-determined by flowing back, by other persons, by other relative absolutes. And he thinks you can't have one-sided coins. A stick always has two ends, right? You always have these two sides. You can't have one and not the other. You can't just be an absolute without the other persons, but you're not just absorbed in other persons without having self-possession. That doesn't go away. In fact, he's saying the one makes the other possible. The two sides need each other. So we start to be able to draw some important conclusions, and we'll begin to finish this discussion. Co-determination of persons and interpersonal dimensions he wants to talk about now. The first dimension of this is individual, an individual interpersonal dimensions. A human being is a diverse animal. What does he mean by diverse? Well, dogs and humans are different from each other, but humans are diverse. Why? Because of that genetic speciating that happens, where each one of us becomes necessarily diverse from others, distinguishable from others. Not just distinguishable from coffee cups and dogs, those are all different, but human beings are the same, but they're the same because they're a diverse being. They're a diverse reality. He says, look, an individual is individuated by matter, just like Aristotle said. We learned about that last time. The individual is an individual due to self-possession, kind of autonomy without regard to others. And the individual is an individual as a function of respectivity. You are what you are, not in a vacuum. That would be to stop at number 2. You are what you are with respect or as a function of everybody and everything else. Diversity, he says, stems from that respectivity. And because respectivity is a feature of us, diversity is a necessary, inescapable feature of us. The second dimension that follows from this, he calls the communal dimension. The human being is a communal or a social animal. He says it consists of a turning towards others. This is this respectivity of relative absolutes. This can only be done with other persons and not with non-human animals and non-animal things. Now, I like Zubiri. I feel like I've learned a number of things from Zubiri. He makes some pretty good arguments. I question the strictness with which he says this, that we cannot be communal in the sense that he means it with non-human animals. I don't know if Zubiri ever had a cat or a dog, but he might have changed his views if he had. I don't know, but he might have. And I would say this is a questionable claim. But it's not questionable that we are turned towards others, turned towards each other. We are being with others. That is a structural feature of what it is. There's no such thing as an isolated human being all alone. You say, wait a minute, I could be alone. I can climb up a mountaintop and there's nobody around. I'm alone. You're alone only with respect to all the other people who aren't there. You say, well, no, I'm alone. I'm alone with my thoughts and my own, just by myself. The thoughts that you have are in a language. You can't have thoughts that don't include a language, and language is not individual. Language is communal. You brought your whole language, your whole way of thinking about the world has come from your interactivity with other people. So being alone is a mode of being with others, right? It's a certain kind of mode, just like being in a crowd doesn't mean you're not lonely. Think about it that way. You could be with lots of other people right next to you, but back when we didn't have to be socially distant, you could be with lots of people and just feel no connection. That's possible too. That is a mode of being with others. So Zubiri is making an important point here. And he says we can turn towards others in two ways. We could turn towards the other person as other, and this is sort of an impersonal kind of turning. It's the basis of society. It just is basic society. So for instance, when I go into the Wawa and there's somebody ringing me up, yeah, I know it's another person, but they're another person as other. They're not that much different than the cash register that's ringing me up most of the time because I'm busy and I'm thinking of things and I just want my coffee and want to go. Society runs on our ability to recognize the interactions of other persons, but we don't take it personally, so to speak. It's impersonal. I don't know their name. I say, how's it going? They say, fine. We're not really communicating with each other. That's what Heidegger would call just idle chatter, stuff you do, the lubrication of basic society, small talk. But we could turn towards the other person as person. And this is what he means by personal communion or communication. right? When we're actually interacting with the person, as another relative absolute. The third dimension, the prospective dimension. The human being is a temporal animal. What does that mean? Well, it's founded in our biogenetic aspect, our speciating. We're born, we live for a while, we make more people, and then we pass away. But there's more than that. He says lots of animals might be like that, but only humans are historical. That's not it's not heredity we're talking about here. It's not evolution. Right? Evolution proceeds by mutation. You learned that in science class, biology class. History proceeds by invention, by making new things happen, by letting new things come in, literally invention, opening a vent and letting things in, letting new possibilities arise that maybe were not expected. Evolution and heredity are moments of history together, aspects of a biogenetic moment. We certainly are evolutionarily. We wouldn't be historical if we weren't evolutionary, but our evolutionarity, because of the reality we are, also includes invention, choice, freedom, invention, history. History, for Zubiri, is a tradition. It's not just a list of things that happened in the past and now they're done. History is literally, what the word tradition means, is a handing over, a handing across of forms of being here and now in reality, possibilities. Tradition is constituting, he says. It makes us what we are. It's continuing. And what we forget is tradition is progressive. Some people latch onto this word tradition as meaning, I don't want anything to ever change. But human beings change. We do. Traditions are good because they help us progress, we think, when they are good. And when they stop, they're bad. Individually, this means we're biographical beings. It doesn't mean we all sit down and write our tell-alls and have them published or tweet our journal entries every day. It means, in effect, we're writing our own story. Tradition transmits the forms of being of the progenitors, the people who came before us, as possibilities for being in reality. We can never look at history and say, that's it, that determines everything. I hope and pray that Zubiri is right about this. I think that he is right about this. But we may be in a point in time where what's been handed over, what generations before have handed over to me and what my generation might be handing over to you, may really be foreclosing on a lot of possibilities. And it's a very scary, unnerving thought, because human beings are the beings of possibilities. We are not just set in stone. We are what we might be. Our being is being. What maybe, what maybe we might be. That's the kind of being we are. Coffee cup is what it is, but we are what we might be. And if we foreclose on too many of those possibilities because of what we've been handed over and what we're handing over, that would be a disaster. Right? Tradition makes possible the event. There's that vent word again. Something breaks in, the realization of appropriated possibilities. So what does he mean by possible? Well, it can mean a number of things, like potency in the sense of not logically impossible. Like it's not logically impossible to fly. There's nothing about flying that says that it can't be done. It could also be like a faculty. So a human being has the potential for knowing, but a human being won't be able to know without a functioning faculty. So for instance, sentient intelligence. So a human, a piece of genetic material that organizes itself as a human being has the potential for knowing, but if it had some sort of illness or injury or accident, something, it might not any longer or at the moment possess a faculty for knowing. It's the kind of thing that can know, but it just doesn't have the faculty. But then there also has to be not just potency and faculty, but there have to be a set of historical circumstances that allow for concrete possibilities. So, for instance, we mentioned flying. Early humans didn't have the possibility to fly. It wasn't logically impossible for them. They had the faculty, at least in principle, they had the potential for knowing about aerodynamics and all that kind of stuff, but they just were technologically immature at that point. The world was not ready for that. They were not ready for that. But there's a further important element of what's possible, what's really possible, which Zubiri calls capacity or talents. So, like today, flight is possible. Certainly it's a possibility. Many people fly. But for me to actually fly, for me to fly a plane myself, I would have to have the money to go to flight school, the talents for flying. You know, I got to have the right kind of eyesight and all that kind of stuff. So even though historically now humans can fly, not all humans have the capacity for flight. They don't have the talents for flight. So for us human beings, until you get to capacitation, until you get to the actual capacity for something, it's not concretely possible. When you tell somebody, get a job, you say, well, there are jobs. Historically, the circumstances are there's businesses and there's jobs. Get a job. But not every person, even though it's not logically impossible for them to have a job. They possess the faculties for having a job. And historically, there are jobs. That's the thing. Not all people are capacitated to have jobs. We have to remember that as a concrete possibility. And you will hear this picked up again in Ayakri and Dussel. Zubiri, as I said, mostly is talking about capacity. If you don't get to that level, it's not really possible. It's just an abstraction to say that something's possible until you get to capacity. The capacities are transmitted by tradition. They can be gained and lost. They're dependent upon the times, the age that we live in. Zubiri likes to say we're not only synchronous, but we're contemporaries of each other. In other words, we are, at least in principle, generally, similarly, historically capacitated. We all live in the same age, but that would mean that there could be people alive right now who don't live in the same age as us. They're synchronous. Their calendar's on the same page as our calendar's on, but they live in a different age. As we say, those people from the Stone Age. We talk like that. So in summary, humans are animals of reality, humans are personal animals, humans are diverse animals, humans are communal animals, humans are temporal and historical animals. All right, that's a lot. We're going to wrap this up in the next series of lectures, but for now, let's take a break.